joining me. And there's a topic that I've been avoiding and trying to pretend like I don't want to talk about, pretend like it's not really that important, that it's something happening far away and it's not a concern for me over here. I got domestic issues to address and I keep trying to think of other things to talk about, but I just can't get away from this topic that's been on my mind for a very long time, but continues to be in the news and on social media and everywhere. You look everywhere, it's there. And so I have to talk about it on this podcast. I have to at least do my best to bring some light and some clarity and at least some environmental justice perspective to this issue. And the issue is Palestine. Palestine, that is the issue. We can't avoid it any longer. We can't pretend like it's not a thing to discuss and a thing to engage in an issue that needs to be properly and thoroughly and consistently broached. We can't do that anymore. We have to talk about Palestine. And, you know, if you have not been under a rock for the last few months, then you would know that there is a relentless, consistent, devastating war being waged in Gaza at the moment, all stemming from this attack that Hamas launched on October 7th, 2023 against Israel in Israel territory, killing civilians, taking hostages, hitting military outposts, military checkpoints, killing Israeli soldiers as well. I mean, these attacks were just so devastating and so brutal that Israel responded. And their response, an utter, complete bombardment, siege, war, destruction, devastation, all the words that you can think of. That's what they've done. That's what they're continuing to do in Gaza at the moment. And so that dynamic is in the news, and it's been in the news for a few months now. I saw the other day where a U.S. Air Force serviceman set himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. here in America because of how he felt about what Israel was doing in the war. And so this thing is just getting out of control and it's just ridiculous. And look, I don't know. A lot of people try to pick sides, you know, it's Israel versus Palestine. It's Israel versus Hamas. It's Israel versus, you know, that Arab world. And there's a lot of discussion about that. And I'm not going to get into the politics personally. I wish I knew more about them. I wish I could really speak more intelligently about the dynamics of the situation. And I have some friends that are helping me with that, sending me resources and sending me videos. And as soon as I watch them and learn more, I'll be able to say more. But I will say this. This is where I'm standing at the moment. We need a ceasefire right now. Right now. There's no way around it. Tens of thousands of civilians are dying. There's no food. There's no clean water. There's no place to live, no shelter. There's no medicine. There's no fuel. There's no internet, no communications. There is no life in Gaza at the moment. With the way that this war is being conducted, we're seeing the unequivocal extermination of a whole group of people right in front of us. And we can't allow that to continue. We need a permanent, sustained ceasefire, and we need to get food and aid into the Gaza Strip. And we need to make sure that people who are sick, people who are injured, people who are children, and babies can have something to eat, can take the right medicine, can do the things that a normal person would do to sustain their lives, go back to their homes and sleep in the bed and not on the ground with a tent that won't protect you from anything. That's what we need. And that's where I stand. And so I know there's lots of strong feelings about what Israel's doing and why they have the right to do it in some people's minds. You know what? Humanity takes precedent over all of that. You have your objectives, you have your military campaign that you've drawn up, that's fine. But when it starts killing thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of civilians, then you need a new strategy. You need to do something different. Because this is not it, and this is not what we're going to stand for. We can't continue to allow it to happen. So I'm standing firmly on the ceasefire now side of the discussion. You can tell me why I shouldn't and what I don't know and why I'm naive. That's fine. When I see civilians, women, children, babies, college students murdered and killed and bombed, when I see hospitals, places of worship, UN schools, not just any schools, United Nations schools, United Nations facilities, United Nations aid workers dying because of what's happening, we got to stop. We have to stop. Medical staff, nurses, doctors being killed, we got to stop. Relief aid workers, humanitarian aid groups don't feel safe delivering aid to people who need it, who are desperate. We need to stop. And so I don't know how long this series of discussions about Palestine will go. And I'm not going to debate the political situations, what needs to happen, how they can resolve the conflict. I'm not qualified at all to talk about that. All I can talk about is the environmental injustices that Palestine has continued to endure for decades. I wanted to do this a while ago, and I was just nervous and scared, and I was unsure how it was going to be received by people listening, and I didn't really want to approach the subject. But now, there's no choice. There's no choice at all. We have to talk about the environmental injustices that are and have been occurring in Palestine. We just have to talk about it. And you know me. You know what we talk about. We talk about water. Clean water. Is there access to it? Is it available? Is it clean? We talk about sanitation. How do we manage our sanitation? How are people able to go to the restroom? How is that being managed and treated? Is there justice there? We talk about air quality. We talk about food. We talk about all these things because this is the kind of environment we want to live in. And when that is not the case, we have to talk about it and understand why and understand what could be done to address those issues. We have to talk about it. We have to talk about it. And so I hope you stay with me. I hope you are also educating yourself as well. Talk to some people. Don't just look at people's social media posts and clickbait videos, but actually do some reading, some real education around this topic so we can have a reasonable, somewhat educated discussion about these issues. Now, I'll tell you what I do know. Palestine is currently two separate territories. There's the West Bank, that's next to Jordan, the Jordan River. The West Bank is the west of Jordan River, and the Gaza Strip, which is down by Egypt. And so that's where the Palestinian refugees, families have historically been situated because of what took place to establish the state of Israel. That's a whole nother discussion. I wish I was smart enough to have it with you. I'm not. And so all I can say is those two territories, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, are currently occupied by the government of Israel, right? So they're not sovereign Palestinian states. They don't have their own systems, their own rights, their own entities that make up an independent country. They live under occupation. And so because of that, the government of Israel is responsible for the welfare of the people living in those territories. That's the point I'm trying to make. Whether you agree or disagree with the occupation, that's fine. But the fact that they're occupying that area means that they're responsible for the health and well-being of those residents. And so we always want to make sure that whoever is in charge, whoever is making the decisions, makes the right decisions to help the people who are living there. And so that's where we're going to start. We're going to start with the fact that the people who live in a certain area are not able to make decisions about what their lives are going to be like. That's what it means to be occupied. It means that there's another country, another group of people who are deciding what your life will be like, what you get to enjoy, what kind of freedoms you have, what kind of access you have to whatever the resources are that are available. And so when we start talking about environmental justice, we have to make sure we talk about the fact that they're not in control. They're not in control. One of the tenets of environmental justice, as the EPA sees it, is this idea of having meaningful involvement and fair treatment in the ways in which your environment is being managed and the ways in which access to resources are being distributed. You have to work together. You have to have meaningful involvement, and it's not happening. It's not happening. There's so many disparities between how a Palestinian would live in an occupied territory, how a Palestinian would live inside the country of Israel, and how they would be living if you're a Palestinian in the Gaza Strip. There's so many differences, so many disparities, so many issues there. And that's the first place to begin. We need to make sure that somehow we close the gap on these issues, that we close the gap on the ways in which people are treated. You shouldn't be treated differently because you're from one place or another if you're being governed by the same entity. That shouldn't happen. It shouldn't be a situation where I see your ID, you're Palestinian, and so this is what you get. But your ID says you're Israeli, you're from Israel, this is what you get. It's much better. That's not how that works. We should all be getting the same access, the same treatment, the same way of engaging our government, engaging our decision makers, engaging if it's parliament or Congress or prime minister or president, whatever that is, it should be the same. It shouldn't be any different. And so we need to think about that. We need to recognize that. It's not enough to say, oh, it looks bad over there. I wish it was better. No, what we need to be thinking about is the reality that there won't be environmental justice until there's meaningful involvement, engagement between the people who are living in a place and the people who govern the place to come together and make decisions that are in the best interest of everyone under that government's authority and control. That's what it means, right? I mean, we get so mad in America when we live outside city limits and some council downtown is making decisions about what happens in our neighborhood out here, and we don't get a chance to talk about it, or at least elect the people who are making the decisions. We have no say in the matter. Well, what do you think is happening here? In Palestine, they don't have that either. They don't have the ability to send an elected official to the parliament in Israel to speak on behalf of the people that live there. That's just not how it's set up. They have their own smaller kind of governing bodies, but they don't have any authority, they don't have any resources, they don't have anything that would allow them to make changes and the things that are better for the people that live there. They just don't have it. And so, before we can even talk about the issues, we have to talk about that. About the fact that the decisions and the resources and the opportunities and the access are restricted. If you're Palestinian living in an occupied Palestinian territory. Now, from what I've read and what I've heard, people would argue that it's restricted whether you live in a territory or not. Because wherever you go as a Palestinian, you're discriminated against. Wherever you go, you're viewed as less than and second class. I don't know that, but that's the discussion. And if that's the case, well, it's wrong. It's wrong. And it shouldn't be that way. And so this is just the beginning of this discussion. This is just the beginning of this engagement on this issue of Palestine. I've never been there. I don't even know how you would get there because I don't think there's an airport. I don't think there's a way to just stop by as you're moving through the Middle East to see what's going on there. I don't know how that works. All I know is when it comes to being able to determine what your life is like and to have a say in what you have access to, if you live as a Palestinian in what I'm calling Palestine, the official term is the occupied Palestinian territories. The UN recognizes Palestine as a state. Other places do. We don't in the US. Other countries don't in the West. But when it comes to Palestine, I'm going to use the name. And my understanding is if you live there as a Palestinian, you don't have much freedom, very few rights, and very few opportunities to make your environment around you better and more secure for your family and for generations that come after you. And so setting aside the brutal war that's happening right now, setting aside the ways in which that war is being waged, setting aside the devastation that that war is causing, even before then, there were huge problems in Palestine, and so we need to talk about them. When it comes to environmental justice, we need to be fighting for it wherever we see the issues. And so I hope you'll join me as we talk about environmental justice in Palestine.